everyone, welcome back. I'm Alex, and today we're going to talk a little bit about Boo because when she was little she actually came down with Parvo virus, and whenever I tell people that, a lot of times they don't know what it is or have never heard of it. So I wanted to just give a little bit of background on the virus itself and our experience with it. I think it's really important that everyone sort of have a general idea of what it is, because if you get a puppy and they start to exhibit some of these symptoms, the quicker you get it treated, the higher obviously their rate of survival. But it can be fatal if it is left untreated or gets too far along. So I wanted to just give a little bit of background on that. A little bit of a disclaimer though, I mean, I am going to get into her symptoms and everything, so if you're not into hearing about, dog bodily functions, then maybe head back to one of my other videos. But if you're, willing to hear our story and want to know what to look for, please stick around and let's get into it. All of the information that I've gotten is from veterinarypartner.com. It's a really good resource that our vet recommended, and there's a wide array of animal categories, and you can go in and search for a disease or an illness, and it'll give you really good information that you can trust. So I will put the link to that down below, but if I'm reading some information, I just want to make sure that you guys have the most accurate information, and that's where we got all of our stuff from. So I wanted to definitely link that for you. So what is Parvo, or Parvo virus as it's called? Really, it's primarily a disease or a virus that infects young puppies or young dogs, typically under a year old, because their immune systems aren't fully formed yet, or they don't have all their vaccines. So I mean, there are different strains of Parvo virus, but the one that I'm talking about today specifically pertains to puppies and young dogs. And if your dog does get Parvo, it can't be passed from dogs to humans, so you don't need to worry about that. So basically, once the virus gets into the dog, it infects them by rapidly dividing cells in like the intestines, bone marrow, lymph nodes, and fetal cells. So if a mom has it, it can be passed to the like her babies. It's not enveloped in the fat the way a lot of other viruses are, so it makes it particularly hard to kill, and it's really, really hardy in environments. So if an area gets infected, it's very difficult to get rid of it, so you sort of have to just let it die. And I'll get into that a little bit more later. But with proper hospitalization and treatment, survival rates of Parvo are like 80%. And if you don't treat Parvo, the mortality rate is like 90 to 95%. So really, like I said at the beginning, the big key is knowing what to look for in symptoms and getting treated as quickly as possible, because the quicker you get treated, the higher the survival rate, obviously. So parvovirus cells are shed in extremely large numbers by infected dogs. So if a dog goes outside and goes to the bathroom or poops, basically, they're shedding those viral cells, and it's basically everywhere. So if another puppy then comes around, they have a very good chance of getting Parvo if their immune systems aren't up to snuff, or they're not fully developed, or they haven't been properly vaccinated. But really, even if you have been vaccinated, Boo was vaccinated, but she actually had worms, so that brought down her immune system. We didn't know that she had worms because she wasn't shedding them yet. So because of that, her immune system was compromised to the point where the vaccines didn't really help. So they think that's what caused her to then become infected with Parvo. So basically, once a dog does go to the bathroom, and whether it's inside, outside, on concrete, on their bed, if they're like playing with stuff, with their toys, and they've maybe licked themselves after they've gone to the bathroom, like it gets everywhere, seriously. And it can be shed in the stool for the first 2 weeks or less after the viral infection, but only a tiny portion of infected stool could be months old, and it's only a small portion of stool is needed to infect a non-immune dog. So basically, if a dog has a like compromised immune system, they'll get infected pretty quickly. There are some cases where dogs will become subclinically infected, is what it's called, basically meaning that they don't appear particularly sick, but they are infected with the virus. And like I said at the beginning of the video, dogs under a year are at risk basically just because they haven't completed their vaccines or their immune systems aren't fully formed. How do you know if your dog is infected? Basically, you just have to look for symptoms. And this was how I knew that Boo was infected, because I've had dogs my whole life, and I just knew that something was wrong. She wasn't acting right, and she had diarrhea. She wasn't vomiting yet, but her diarrhea was bad, and I just knew that something wasn't right. Basically, 3 days after we got her, she started to get sort of lethargic. She wasn't eating as much. The first symptom that I really saw was blood in her poop and her stool, and there was some mucus in it as well. And that concerned me. So obviously I hadn't really seen that before in a dog. So took her to the vet. They did some tests and they said it could just be stress, because that is, with new puppies, changing their environment, that can cause some stress and that can cause some blood in the stool. So she tested negative for Parvo, and they just sent us home, said to give her a bland diet and that sort of thing. But as the days progressed, it was basically like 2 days later, she couldn't lift her head up. She hadn't eaten anything. She wasn't drinking. And she just had really, really bad diarrhea. And basically it was like a mustard yellow color of diarrhea. I've never seen a color of poop come out of a dog like that. And there were traces of blood in it as well. And it was bad. I was very, very concerned. I was like crying, and there was just, something wasn't right. So at that point, we decided to take her to the vet emergency room that we have here locally, and she did test positive for Parvo. And at that point, she was so lethargic, she wouldn't really stand up. She wasn't really lifting her head. I went to try to get her to drink some water, and she just basically laid her head into her bowl of water. So it was really, really sad. And you feel so bad, you just want to be able to do something to make them feel better. So those were the symptoms that Boo exhibited. How the virus enters them, and I said how she got infected, but basically, if a puppy licks themselves after going to the bathroom, eats food off of the ground or the floor, or is around an infected area outside, just a minuscule amount of infected stool is really all it takes to infect them. The incubation period is 3 to 7 days, so it takes about a week for a puppy to start exhibiting symptoms like that. The virus starts in the lymph nodes, and then after a couple of days, it spreads into the bloodstream and eventually makes its way into the bone marrow and the intestines. The bone marrow is really what then allows it to then compromise the immune system. But the gastrointestinal tract is really where it hits hard, because the GI tract has these little fistules or fingers that the virus is able to cling to. So that's then what causes vomiting and diarrhea. And like I said, Boo had diarrhea, but at that point she hadn't gotten the vomiting yet, so we did catch it early enough. But a lot of times dogs will just start vomiting. They can't keep anything down, and that's one of the things that the other symptoms that you should look for as well. But really what causes ultimately death in a dog because of this is diarrhea and vomiting. Causes a lot of fluid loss, dehydration, until shock, and they eventually pass away. Loss of the intestinal barrier, because basically the virus will eat away at their intestines, and then if that happens, then it allows bacterial invasion potentially into the entire body, and then they get septic shock essentially. So again, early recognition of symptoms is really, really vital to being able to get treatment. So basically, once we took Boo to the vet, they do to check and see if they have Parvo. They will do a fecal test, so a stool test basically. They'll do a blood test, and then they'll check their antibodies and white blood cell count and that sort of stuff. So with Boo, the first time we took her to the vet, she tested negative because she wasn't shedding the virus yet. So when they did that stool sample, they didn't see any of those cells present. But whenever we took her to the emergency room, she did test positive at that point in time because she had started shedding the virus at that point, which means it's visible for them to be able to see in the test. So then at that point, treatment, the options, I'm going to be honest, it is costly, but again, the quicker you recognize that this could be an issue, the quicker you get them to the hospital, and ultimately hopefully the cheaper the treatment will be. The first emergency room, the emergency room that we took her to, they estimated the treatment was going to be between $3,000 and $5,000. Now, that was for around the clock care because they are there 24 hours and somebody is always there. So the first night we said, mind you, we had her 3 days at this point and we just didn't know what to do. But we said, all right, keep her overnight. It was going to be like $500, and we were going to then pick her up in the morning. As soon as we were able to call other veterinary clinics, that's what we started doing. So basically we started shopping around, asking people, asking different veterinary clinics in the area, can they treat parvo? What's their estimated cost? And what their course of action would be, because $3,000 and $5,000 just, I would pay it, but at the same time we had her 3 days and we didn't know if the outcome was going to be favorable at that point. So ultimately we were able to go to our current veterinary clinic, and I believe her treatment ended up being like around $2,500, but they don't have around the clock care. So what we did was dropped her off first thing in the morning, like at 7:30 when the clinic opened. She was there all day getting her treatments, and then I would pick her up when they closed in the evening, and basically I stayed up with her throughout the night. They told me what to do as far as monitoring her and trying to get her to eat and making sure she pees, because once you get dehydrated, if they're not drinking, they're not going to pee as much. So making sure she was drinking water and going to the bathroom and that sort of thing. So basically we did that all weekend. We took her to the vet on Thursday. I stayed up with her all night, Friday night, Saturday night, and by Sunday she was on her last course of treatments. Expect a 3-day hospital stay at least for treatments, depending on what their levels are and if they're responding properly and that sort of thing. What they'll typically do is give antibiotics. They'll pump them with fluids since they are dehydrated, give them some nausea control medicine if that's necessary, if they are vomiting. And in more extreme cases, they might need blood plasma transfusions. If the blood is sufficiently, infected, they might need a blood transfusion, and that's obviously where things get very expensive. But again, if you recognize the symptoms, it won't necessarily get to that point. How can you prevent parvo? Really, it's about making sure they're vaccinated, protection after infection. So you basically have to quarantine your dog if they are infected for a while. Boo, I didn't let her, or it was recommended that we not let her go around to other dogs for a few weeks, just to make sure that everything was out of her system. Obviously, we did get concerned then at that point about socialization, because that's the prime time for socializing your dog. So once she was able to be around other dogs, I took her to, socialization, like puppy play times and that sort of thing. And she's fine now, but that was a concern for me, as well as potty training, because I didn't want her to be back outside. It's recommended that you don't let them go back into a potentially infected area. So basically we just had her going on pee pads for a couple weeks, and then we just had to start potty training her from that point. But that all comes with the territory. Another act of prevention is just keeping young puppies away from communal areas. So that's why they recommend that puppies do not go to the dog park, because they aren't to the immune or vaccine levels that they should be. It is possible that another parvo dog could have been there and the virus is there, so it's just too much of a risk. So I would say keeping your dog in safe areas, making sure they're up to date on vaccines, and making sure to keep them away from infected dogs so that they may not possibly get it themselves. What's the cleanup aftermath? Let me tell you, Parvo is really, really hard to kill, and this was probably aside from the treatments and staying up with her all night, this was probably the next most difficult part, because you pretty much have to either throw away or bleach everything. Parvo is extremely hardy, and it can be carried on shoes, clothes. If it's the winter time, freezing sort of contains it, so that doesn't kill it in any way. It just sort of allows it to be like frozen in time. And many normal household disinfectants like Lysol don't kill it. It's extremely hardy, and basically you can track it into your house. If you go outside and step into an infected area and get those cells get the virus on your shoes and track it into the house, that you're done at that point. The rule of thumb is that indoors the virus loses its infectivity within a month, assuming the room temperature or higher is maintained. So it should be safe to introduce other puppies or a new puppy into a potentially infected environment after a month. Outdoors is a little bit harder. So shaded areas are basically considered contaminated for 7 months. Areas with good sunlight are considered contaminated for 5 months. And everything else, like I said, you basically have to bleach or throw away. And that's pretty much what we did. We threw away her bed, all of her toys, any of the hard toys or anything that was able to be washed in bleach, we kept those, but everything else we threw out. We went to the extent of bleaching areas on the sidewalk where she had gone to the bathroom. I did spray a bleach water solution onto the areas of grass that she had gone to. But yeah, pretty much everything just needs thrown away. Hardwood as well. We got a bleach solution and washed down the hardwood, luckily, because we did have hardwood in the majority of places where she went to the bathroom. And then if they do go to the bathroom on carpet, steam cleaning will kill the virus. For a lawn, you can water down the area, and that will help kill the virus. But again, it's probably safer just to, like I said, I bleached it. It didn't kill the grass because we didn't put a ton of it on there. We did it with the water solution, so I think that helped. But yeah, we just didn't want to take any chances, and it was the summertime, so we did our best just to keep her away from the areas that she had gone to the bathroom. When we did let her outside, doors, carpet, and hardwood, if it's kept, your house is kept at room temperature and you're able to clean it down or whatever, or if you don't clean it down, it's considered disinfected after a month. But like I said, we did a bleach solution on our hardwood we got a cleaning solution, and anything else on carpet, we steam cleaned it. So that is a quick overview of Parvo. I hope that it made sense and it at least helps a little bit. But Boo is happy and healthy today. She's fine. Some dogs that have really bad gastrointestinal infiltration can sometimes have lasting impacts on sensitive stomach and that sort of thing. She maybe has a little of that. I don't know if she does or not, but she seems to, she eats fine, she plays fine. You wouldn't even know that she was sick at this point. And I really think that because we caught it early and we knew what to look for, and we just knew that something was wrong, we were able to save her life. And I'm thankful for that, because I think in any other situation, she might have been euthanized or put in a shelter. She probably would be dead. It's unfortunate that a lot of dogs do end up in shelters or euthanized because they have Parvo. A lot of times it's because of the cost. So I think that it is really important that you just keep an eye out. If you notice that there's blood in their poop, if you notice that they're throwing up, or if you sense that they're maybe not eating as much as they should, or they're not drinking as much as they should, the best course of action, it's always better to take your dog to the vet first, but when you sense that something could be wrong, rather than waiting and having it be too late. But like I said, with proper treatment and catching it, Parvo has a survival rate of 80% or more. So I hope that helps. I hope you learned a little bit today. I really appreciate everybody that has subscribed to the channel. And yeah, thanks so much. And we'll see you next time.